Welcome back. Today we have a remarkable guest joining us, John Thomas, a seasoned leader with over 25 years of experience across higher ed, government administration, nonprofits, and organizational consulting. John brings a wealth of knowledge in leadership coaching, team building, employee engagement, and the HR function, making him a true powerhouse in the world of leadership development. Currently, John is a consultant within the organizational development team at Washington University in St. Louis, but his career spans impressive achievements. In his previous role as chief people officer for a Missouri state agency, John was instrumental in transforming the organization, reducing vacancy fill time from 92 to 35 days and boosting employee motivation by 28%. He's worked with senior leaders in higher ed, large nonprofits, state government, and even athletic teams. With insights drawn from years of hands-on experience and a unique perspective on what it means to lead effectively, John is here to share invaluable advice for business owners and leaders who want to make a real impact. In this episode, we'll dive into John's inspiring journey. We'll explore the core principles of leadership and discuss his thoughts on emotional intelligence, mentorship, and leading through uncertainty. Plus, he'll introduce us to the concept behind his book, Nobility, and share takeaways that you can apply immediately. So whether you're leading a team, growing a business, or simply interested in personal growth, this episode is packed with actionable wisdom. So let's get started and hear from the man himself. John, welcome to the pod.
Hey, Carrie, thanks so much. It's an honor to catch up, and I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, but thanks for allowing me the space here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super glad to have you. And just so our listeners know, John and I have worked together in the past and have been in a professional and friendship relationship for lots of years, well over probably coming up on 14 or 15 years, I would say. So a lot of rich history here. And I'm just super excited to have you because I've been able to see your brain at work through a career. And so I'm super excited to share that with my listeners. So let's go ahead and jump in and give them what they came here for. Can you share your journey and what inspired you to be someone who's dedicated their entire career to whether it's employee or student athlete or leadership development?
Absolutely. And like probably most people, my career path is very nonlinear. Back when we started working together, I think, I took a step down. It was probably $13,000 decrease in pay. So it was a very nonlinear path, but I think I could trace it back to high school. Really. I had a coach, and I can take you to a spot on a track where he looked at me and square in the eye. And one day he said, "Johnny, just find one thing and get better today. Just find one thing to get better today at." And that was a seed that planted deep in my heart that I've kind of tried to foster and water and grow on a daily basis. And so the short answer is, it was inspired and originated with a high school coach. But I grew up around people, looking at people, watching people, and being part of teams. I joined my first team when I was 6 years old. And so teams and people have been a part of my life for almost 50 years now. And teams are teams are teams are teams. It doesn't matter if it's on a field or in a boardroom or in a classroom, in a court, wherever it is, people form and teams function very similarly, regardless. And probably, some data that really inspires me to keep doing it. The Center for Creative Leadership has some statistics that say the average supervisor or leader in America becomes a supervisor at age 33, but they don't get their first supervisor training until age 42. And so there's 9 years where people are struggling and trying to figure out how to lead. And so that really caused me to kind of foster this passion to try to help people just know how to be a better leader.
So well said. Makes me miss working with you every single day. I think about when I'd walk into your office and you'd have all this stuff drawn up on your wall, and we would just dream about how to impact people. I love hearing that. And really, I think about one of my most influential coaches when I'm listening to you talk, and he gave me a nickname that is still my favorite nickname to this day. My maiden name's Ross, and he called me Rock Ross or just Rock. And I think of him often. We're Facebook friends, and he made a huge impact on my life. But I've also got teammates that stick out in my mind a lot during that time too. So whether you're the leader or the peer in that situation, you're right. Teams make a huge impact.
Absolutely. And you when you talk about a coach, I love this word coach. In fact, at a leadership development course and training that I'm going through and I've been through parts of it, they asked me like, what's one word to encapsulate like what your passion and what you want to do is? And I said, it's coach. And it goes back, the word coach comes from like the mid 1500s. So we're talking, hundreds of years ago. And it was in Hungary, and it was a two-wheel vehicle, much like we have a dolly that moves furniture today. And they called it a coach. And then in the late 1800s in America, we had stage coaches. And then today we have coaches that carry bands and groups of people around. And really at its core, a coach is somebody who finds people where they are and takes them to where they want to be. And so I just think about, coaches and how it plays into this idea of developing and reaching our potential.
So you're talking a little bit about this already. So what are the core principles of leadership that you emphasize in your coaching and mentorship to others?
When we worked at the University of Missouri System, one of our leaders introduced me because she probably doesn't even know it, but Jill Pollock talked about the leadership challenge. And I started doing a lot of research on the leadership challenge and have become a trained facilitator, and I'm in the process of becoming a certified master or train the trainer for the leadership challenge. And that started over 40 years ago. Tom Peters asked a couple of grad students, like, how do you measure exemplary leadership? They looked at each other and they didn't know, but so they came up with this process and they started asking people to write out the answer to their question. What was it like when you were at your best as a leader, or when you saw someone else at their best as a leader? It's the personal best exercise. And what they discovered is there were 5 core practices that emerged from all their data. And it's to model the way, which includes knowing what your values are, being able to clarify your values are, who you are, and then living those values, doing what you say that you're going to do. So it's modeling the way, setting that compass. Secondly, it's about inspiring a shared vision. It's about painting a picture of where we are going to go into the future. Third, it's about challenging the process. It's about continuously improving, getting better every day, challenging the status quo, asking the question why. But sometimes we have phantom rules in organizations and teams that we don't even know are there, and we never ask why. But the best leaders are able to challenge the process. Fourthly, they enable people to act. They enable others to act. It's all about collaboration and helping people reach their being competent and reach their potential. And then fifthly, they discovered along the way that the most exemplary leaders encourage the heart. They're able to recognize accomplishment. They are able to celebrate, but they also just to add courage to people. And so those are my core. I've really, Jill Pollock introduced that to me in 2017, but here we are in 2024, and it is like so close, near and dear to my heart to just do those 5 practices. Back in September, I was able to spend a little bit of time with one of the authors of the Leadership Challenge, Barry Posner. And it was just how honest, authentic Barry is about leadership and the development of leaders. And one of the things he and Jim Kouzes say is that the context of leadership changes constantly. And even across industries, you and I, we've worked in different industries, but while the context of leadership changes, the content of exemplary leadership remains the same. Over 40 years of their collection of data, if you can do those 5 things, encourage the heart, model the way, challenge the process, enable others to act, and forgot one, but those 5 principles or practices will greatly increase your effectiveness as a leader. And it's how ordinary people make extraordinary things happen in organizations, regardless of the industry.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I get asked in my consulting and advisory firm often, well, what industries do you specialize in? Because, there's going to be a long ramp up time in my industry, whatever that company that's presenting themselves. And I always kind of chuckle and I'm like, yes, I agree. I would want to learn about medical spas or dermatology or law offices because there are uniquenesses. But in general, leading humans is the same across industries. And so whether I've been at distribution, like gun parts and ammunition or higher ed or finance or
Yes.
insurance or M&A or whatever it is, like people are people and leadership is leadership. So I totally agree with you on that. And I just feel like that's lost on a lot of people. We start to think, well, this is special and unique and nobody understands. But isn't that, I mean, from a spiritual perspective, that's what the devil wants us to think. He wants us to be isolated and to feel like nobody understands us so we can go down this selfish spiral. And instead, we're supposed to like link arms in community and get stronger together. And yeah, I love that point. And we'll have to send a link to Jill Pollock. I haven't thought about her recently, but she was a wonderful leader. And for our listeners, so she was at University of Colorado system, then came to University of Missouri system, just a powerhouse of a woman, and just a really excellent opportunity that you and I both had to get to work under her.
Yeah, and one other thing I thought of, Carrie, is that Jim and Barry both emphasized that leadership is not just a science, but it's also an art. And so it looks different in different settings. It might look different, but there is science that backs up. So we have 5 exemplary practices, but it's also an art and can take on a life of its own, regardless of the industry or what type of team we might be leading.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, how can business owners develop their leadership skills while they're also in the grind of managing day-to-day ops?
Boy, that's such a great question, Carrie, because business owners wear so many different hats, whether it's in finance and legal and HR and operations, and it feels like they have to do everything. And so sometimes their development as a leader can kind of get put on the back burner. I really believe that to develop our leadership skills, we have to really be intentional and deliberate in our efforts to develop those skills. At the same time, I think we can develop those skills just in everyday life without like going to a conference or paying a lot of dollars to an organization to get a certification. Whether it's listening to a pod such as Don't Waste the Chaos. I mean, that can help you develop your skills,
Yeah.
whether it's reading HBR, Harvard Business Review, whether it's talking to mentors and coaches. So often we have gotten caught up in this notion that the development of my leadership skills, I've got to go here and then somebody's just going to pour leadership into me. But really, leadership is already inside of all of us. It's identifying it and letting it get out and pulling leadership out of the people that we're leading so they can express that leadership. So there's micro learnings, the internet, chat GPT, or even Marshall Goldsmith has a new AI bot where all of his writings are consolidated in this bot, and you can ask Marshall any leadership question and it calls all of his books, and his voice even talks to you and says, this is how you should address it. So
How
there are a
cool.
lot of tools that are available that we can leverage to help our leadership skills grow. I hate to say that we're without excuse, but really, I mean, if we want to grow, we have to have this desire to grow and improve and develop and be really deliberate. If you have a commute, you can utilize that commute, reframe it. And like, rather than, oh, this commute, well, now you've got an hour of personal development and skill development. And so I think it's just having a desire and then be very intentional and deliberate. There's some great podcasts that can help you grow and maybe even look at things from a different perspective or an angle that you haven't thought of before. So it's deliberate, it's intentional, and you have to have this desire to do it. but the information is available. We just have to decide and commit to doing it.
Well, listening to you talk, it's making me think about the journey that my personal leadership has taken, and it has presented itself differently in different settings. What would you say about, your ability to lead? I guess what I'm thinking of is now that I own my own business, when you were saying pull the leadership out of someone, I feel like I am able to be more of my true self now because of
Mm.
the environment that I'm in. It's self led. I've created this mission, this vision, these values. I'm fully in alignment with those. They match me personally, and I'm able to really blossom in a way that I've seen, shimmers of throughout the years, but now I just feel like I'm standing on this mountain getting to be myself. What do you think that what role does environment play into that?
I think that's a great point. I don't know. I had ever thought about it like that. I've never owned my own business, so to speak, and had that fortune. But right now I'm on a team that allows that for myself. And it is very freeing. So I do think the climate, the environment that we find ourselves in plays to that. And so as leaders, I think it's incumbent upon us is to create this environment or the climate for people to be able to bring their best self and be themselves and identify their leadership skills and then express those leadership skills.
Yeah, I agree. That safe environment. And then also making sure that person feels known and respected for what they bring to the table. I think that's very valuable. So, what are some of the common leadership challenges that business owners face, and how can they overcome some of those?
Wow, I'm gonna really do my best to stay in my lane here because I don't know anything about finance. But I'm gonna talk a lot of the organizations that I collaborate with, consult with. One of the top things that I hear from leaders is the ability to recruit and retain. Building and keeping a successful team or an effective, healthy team together. I think it's really important to evaluate who and how we're bringing people into our team and organization. I think sometimes we just, post the job and we look at resumes and then try to get somebody in the seat. But there's some new research came out in a Psychology Today article in July that says 91% of success indicators of a new hire are missed in an interview. Like when you talk about 9 out of 10 things that would predict success, we miss in an interview. And the researcher, his name's Timothy Wingate, but he said, it's like this world-class chef judging a baking competition and only interviewing the contestants about their recipe rather than tasting their baked good. And I thought, well, how powerful is that? So I think it's like maybe even rethinking how we hire people and what our interviews look like. Do we maybe give a candidate a real current problem that our team is facing and just see what their thoughts are, see how they would approach it and how they would think through it and how they would address the issue and maybe just get a taste of their work style. So I think evaluating how we really bring people into our organizations is important. But I think also on a lot of people's minds, given that we've gone through, what was called the Great Resignation and all the quiet quitting and the silver tsunami, like what are we going to do? I think that it would be very critical for people to stop and pause. I had a team member that I supervised a couple years ago say, John, have you seen what took TikTok by storm over the weekend? And I was, what's that? And they said, well, it's quiet quitting. Everybody's quiet quitting. I said, wait a second. People have been quiet quitting for years. We just put a name on it finally. And she was like, what? And so, but there's some research that even shows this. Harvard Business Review wrote about it in October of 21. But the research was done in 2020 from researchers from, I think it was Georgetown. And there were 4 researchers that came together from respectable institutions. And they said, we've been conditioned, to say that turnover is bad and retention is good. But they said, we want to study like, are we retaining the right people? And so what they did is they looked at, are people enthusiastically or reluctantly staying or leaving? And so they had four quadrants. And what they found out is people that reluctantly left were about 4%. People that enthusiastically left, the people that are giving people the bird as they walk out the door saying, screw you, that number was 16%. So that's 20% of people that are leaving. So that means 80% are staying. But the enthusiastically staying was 38%, while the reluctantly staying were 42%. And that's the quiet quitters, the people that are reluctantly staying. And so the researchers took it a step further and they said, would it be possible to move people from reluctantly staying to enthusiastically staying? What they discovered is that job, or they called it job embeddedness, or the degree to which somebody is connected to the social fabric of your organization. And the three things that they said contributed to the job embeddedness is their fit. And they said fit is dynamic. It is not just like, do I fit when I start? But when a new initiative is announced or a new leader comes in, people are constantly reassessing, how am I going to fit in this organization? Do I have a future here? And so it's like they're constantly assessing, reassessing. Am I going to be able to have a place here? So it's about fit, but it's also about personal relationships. Do they have relationships with the people they work with? And that goes to this climate. Like, do we create a climate where people can have relationships and know about each other? People really want community when they come to the office or they join an organization. And the third thing was, what sacrifices would I have to make if I leave? What have they made so great about working here that it's going to be tough for me to walk away from? And they said those three things really, contribute to what they call job embeddedness, and said, if you're going to move somebody from being a reluctant stayer to an enthusiastic stayer, look at those three things and do people fit? Do they have good relationships? And what kind of offerings are they going to have to give up if they leave? So I think, that's just one aspect, but it's recruiting and building and keeping a team together, I think, is one of the big challenges people have.
Yeah, those are great takeaways. Can you discuss the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership and how business owners can cultivate that within themselves?
Boy, I wish I would have known about emotional intelligence earlier in my career.
Me too. Me
Um,
too.
I think it is such a valuable tool to have, and people misunderstand it when we talk about emotional intelligence. And it's even more than just reading a room. So I think a couple of things that I've tried to implement in my own personal leadership journey is humbly acknowledging that there are perspectives other than my own, and being able to give voice and allow people to have voice that don't necessarily agree with me. I think too often we're like, and this is the way I kind of was raised, and I don't believe it was intentional, but unintentionally, I kind of had this mindset that if you didn't think like me, look like me, act like me, dress like me, talk like me, you were wrong because I was always right. But emotional intelligence is this ability to say, you know what, there are perspectives that are other than mine, and they might be right. And it's using Adam Grant's idea of thinking again, like running some experiments. I've run some experiments. I thought maybe they're right. And sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And I can keep my hypothesis, but I have to keep running these experiments. But it helps with decision making when we listen to other people's perspectives. It can help with meetings and in our communication style and one-on-ones. It impacts our leadership at every level, even how we write emails and write communication. Emotional intelligence has to be fostered, but I think spending some time in reflection, honest reflection, and asking ourselves, how did I come across, or and maybe even asking. I've been blessed in some different organizations where I've been able to go to team members and different people that I led and ask them, how did that come across? How did that land? What do people think? What are they saying? And get some honest feedback, because there were times I had to go and try to make amends and maybe correct some things or correct how it landed, because it didn't land the way that I hoped it would and that I intended, but the impact was rough. And so I think, to your question, emotional intelligence is vital. It is so critical in the life of leaders. And we have to be very intentional about spending some time in reflection, asking questions, getting feedback, and taking that to heart to try to avoid some blind spots and biases that we might have.
Yeah, and I love that reflection piece. And if you ask, I certainly have had to do that. Ask somebody, hey, okay, in this meeting when I said this, like, how did that come across to you? First step is, can the person safely respond to you?
So good.
When you ask your employees or your colleagues to respond to you, if they're nervous to give you that final 10%, then you've created a culture that's not healthy. And so, that's kind of your first step is if everyone's like, we're good. No, I liked that. It's like, okay, we might be
Mm,
experiencing some groupthink, or maybe we hired everyone who thinks like we do. Maybe they actually do agree with us, but that's dangerous too. We need some dissenters in the room. We need some folks who are
so
pointing
good.
out differences. And so even that initial response, their ability to respond and how they respond also tells a little bit of a story. So I love that reflection piece.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about mentorship. Speaking of asking our folks how they feel about things, what role does mentorship play in leadership development? And how can business owners and leaders find and become good mentors?
Relationships are everything. I really think that there are 5 relationships we all need. We need a mentor. We need a sponsor. We need, and one person can fulfill more than one of these roles, but we need mentors. We need sponsors. We need partners. We need competitors or people that are going to push us to compete or be ourselves. It doesn't mean that we have to win. It means that we're trying to be our best and do our best. So it's like somebody that pushes me to think differently. One of the things that I really appreciate about the team I'm currently on is like they push me and they like challenge my thinking to become better and to get better. And then the fifth is a mentee. So in answer to your question, in those 5 relationships, one is a mentor, one is a mentee. And I think mentorship is doesn't have to always be formal. I consider you to have mentored me, and we didn't work like a long time together, over a year, but yet there were places that you really mentored me. I was reflecting this morning thinking, oh, Carrie, I remember when she said this or she did that. You took me aside after a presentation and you were like, hey, John, your content is good, but you need to do a little better job at tying a bow and wrapping things up. And so that's one thing that I've really worked on in these last few years is how do I tie something up? But it's the result of these mentors that come into our lives. Clint Pulver, I don't know if you're familiar with Clint Pulver. He's known as the undercover millennial. And what he did is he did a lot of research undercover. He would go into businesses and ask the employees, like at a Foot Locker, like, do you like working here? And he collected all this research just kind of covertly and said that, when he talks to people, when they say, I really don't like my job, they talk about their manager. But when they talk about liking their job, they talk about their mentor. And I think, when we get into this area and this space of mentors, it's just leading and guiding people. And I had a young lady who eventually succeeded me at the Department of Health for the state of Missouri. But one day she looked across the desk at me during a one-on-one and she said, John, you were my mentor. And I was like, whoa, like I hadn't thought of myself in that relationship with her. So I guess my big thing about mentorship is it doesn't always have to be formal. Some of the greatest and most powerful mentors have been informal, but it's just having these career and coaching conversations with people to help guide them on their journey. And many of the leaders that are listening to this podcast are probably mentoring people and don't even know it. They're mentoring and don't even realize it. And so when we understand that we're having that kind of impact on people, it can really change maybe how we talk or what we're going to say or how we're learning, and push us to really dig a little deeper, go a little stronger.
Yeah, I'm sure that everyone listening to this podcast is mentoring someone in one way or the other. But
Absolutely.
I totally agree with you. There's been seasons where I've been like, hey, let's put a formal mentorship program together. And some of the best leaders are like, I need a mentor.
Mm.
I don't want to be the mentor. I need a mentor. And I
Yes,
think we get nervous that when we are sitting in the mentorship seat that we have to have it figured out. And I know you and I both know like we never have it all figured out ever, not
that's
even
right.
close. I mean, not I am I moved from corporate to entrepreneurship and I feel like a little baby now. Like I don't know my ass from my elbow so many days. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to figure this out, but it looks
Yeah.
so different than how I grew up in business. And so now I'm like, gosh, I would like to talk to business owners who have been at it longer than me. I'm talking 3 years plus. Like we're short term in it now because I'm new to this. And so regardless of what season of life we're in, there's always someone ahead of us. There's always someone behind us. And I think like linking arms and trying to support one another is super valuable. I have a lot of people that reach out and say, I just can't find anyone to mentor me. And I'm like, well, if you
Mm.
wait until someone extends a formal invitation and, sends you 12 calendar invites for the next 12 months of the year, like no one's going to do that anymore unless they're inside of an organization. It's just not happening like that. And so taking it where you can get it and having the one-off conversation and gleaning what you can from a person, I think is kind of the new age of mentorship.
Love it. And another thing Clint Pulver says is that mentees invite mentors into their lives and hearts. And I think that, if we need a mentor, find somebody that is credible, that you respect, and maybe just ask them, hey, would you be my mentor? I think they would be honored, and you'd probably be surprised at the response of having the opportunity to pour into you from their expertise and their experience. And I think mentorship, one of the things also lost sometimes is that mentoring is reciprocal. There's a reciprocity. We end up mentoring each other through
Yeah.
the entire process.
Yeah, if somebody reaches out to me and says like, "Hey, would you mentor me?" Usually my first response is like, "Why? What for? What are you trying to get?" And you know me, I am very blunt. So I like to just get down to it. Like, what are you trying to obtain? Like, I'm not saying no, I'm just trying to learn. And I had somebody on LinkedIn reach out to me a few weeks back and he was like, "Hey, can I get a phone call with you?" And that's that just drives me bananas because I want somebody to be clear with me. And so a lot of those I'll ignore, but it happened to be somebody from Missouri and it happened to be a veteran. And, I've got a
Mm.
heart for veterans. And so I replied back to him and I said, if you want 30 minutes of my time, you're going to have to tell me why. I want to understand why you're having a conversation with me. And I see where you work. So if you're trying to sell something to me, I have two financial advisors already. But I'm just assuming that you're trying to sell to me. But if you're not, and if it's for another purpose, spell it out for me and then give me something to respond to. And he responded back and said, I heard you speak at this event. I liked how you were X, Y, and Z. I think I've got something to learn.
Mm.
And I sent him a message back and said, now we're talking. Here's my assistant's email address. Let's get something on the calendar. I
Cool.
want to help and support, but I think just blanketly reaching out and being like, "Hey, I'd love to grab coffee sometime," especially if it's a person who is driven and has a lot of commitments. That person's probably not going to prioritize the time. But if we can, in a pointed way, say, "I look up to you for this reason," or "I read what you wrote," or "I heard what you said," and I would just like to learn more about that. Most of the time, we're all selfish creatures. Like flattery goes somewhere with people. If somebody says, I heard what you had to say about that and I really appreciate it. I want to be like that or whatever. Then I'm more apt to say like, oh, okay, if you want to just sell something to me, just tell me that and I'll tell you if I'm interested or not. But being really pointed, I think, just as some feedback. If someone's listening that wants a mentor, give a person something to respond to, and a little flattery never hurt anything.
Absolutely.
So, how can business owners lead their teams? Right now we're in this weird time period where we know that the presidency is changing. We know the economy has been doing some weird things. We know that, layoffs have been huge in 2024. And it seems like so many big corporations have maybe struggled to strategic plan. Now they're doing layoffs. How can business owners lead their teams through times of change and uncertainty?
Wow. Change is, there's all these points of discussion and even data that I think somebody said 70% of change initiatives fail. And, there's all kinds of good quotes too. Mark Twain, he's from up here, kind of where we live. He's known as saying the only person who likes change is a wet baby. And I saw somebody else that said that, there's only one place you can expect no change, and that's at your favorite vending machine. But like change is a fact of life. Heraclitus taught us that no person steps in the same river twice. It's always moving. It's always changing. And the only constant really is change. And one of the tools that I was introduced to probably 6 years ago or so is the influence model by McKinsey. And it helps. I use it constantly with teams and leaders on how do we address change. And it's just 4 boxes. And one box is that you have to foster understanding and conviction about why we are doing this. Why are we changing? But it's like present with some data. It's not just I woke up and I feel like it, but it's like this is why we are changing, and foster build some understanding about this is why we did it. Here's the situation. Here were the complications. This is what we considered. And this is our recommendation. This is the route that we are going. But you have to foster some understanding and conviction about the reason that you're making this change. And then once you do that, you want to like utilize some existing mechanisms that are already in place, whether it's a newsletter or during one-on-ones or town halls or whatever kind of forum, listening tours, whatever forum you might, what are the existing mechanisms that we already have in place where we can like continue to promote this change? And then thirdly, like what added skills and tools do our team members need? Do they need additional customer service training, or are they going to need this training to utilize this new software? But what additional and new skills? And then how are we going to get them that? Like, where are we going to go? Are we going to do it in house? Do we already have people that can provide the training? And then the fourth lever that you want to be able to pull, or that fourth box, is what are our leaders going to role model? It's like the leaders have to be able to stack hands and say, when we leave this room, we are all on board. And McKinsey's research shows that when you pull all 4 of those levers, your change initiative has 8 times, there's 8 times greater chance that it's going to be implemented. But they said the most important lever of all 4 is what are the leaders role modeling? What do they do? How do they, like, what have they agreed on? And will they hold each other accountable? Like, hey, remember when we agreed that we were all going to role model this, but holding each other accountable, actually role modeling. And I think those 4 things, it's just, and you can Google 4 building blocks of change by McKinsey, and there's a nice little PDF paper you can download that walks you through the influence model, or I'd be happy to talk with anybody about it. I am a firm believer in the influence model by McKinsey on how do you try to ensure that your change initiative has a good chance of succeeding. And you want to pull all 4 of those levers.
That's good. And I also am hearing you say we don't just change and then
That's
explain
right.
later. It takes a lot of forethought. It takes planning. It takes walking through some conversations and being proactive with that. I think a lot of times, especially in small to mid-sized businesses, but I've seen it in large too. It's like we've decided at an executive level that we know where we need to go. We haven't really told anybody, and a lot of people are maybe ignorant to what's going on, and then we just make the change, and then we're frustrated at the executive level because people don't understand the why, or maybe they don't get the business, and then we're frustrated at the more entry level because we feel like people don't care about our opinions. They never think about the people doing the work, when really just some forethought would have, and some communication with the forethought would have changed the outcome in such a huge way. And so I love the intentionality of that.
Yeah, it's really important. You know, at the state of Missouri, you mentioned in the intro that we saw our time to fill with vacancies go from 92 to 35 days. Well, in the first few days, months that I was there, I was asking managers like, you know, what is your biggest pain point? Where can I help you? Where can I be of the most assistance and greatest partner to you, and provide the greatest value? And overwhelmingly, they said, we need to be able to get people hired faster. But at that time, we didn't even know, our team didn't know how many days it took to fill a vacancy. So I cobbled that data together the best I could. But it was a journey, because once we started moving, managers were like, wait a second, I'm not so sure I want to hire people faster the way you're moving. So it was like we had to work through this change and navigate and remind people, hey, this is why we're doing it, and lead people through change. It's not always easy, but you can follow this model and it really be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. So, what advice would you give to business owners who are just starting on their leadership journey? Or maybe they're that middle manager that you said has made the supervisory position, but now there's this gap in time before I've really learned anything. What advice do you give them when they're ready to make a significant impact, but they don't know where to go yet?
Impact. That's one word that I just love. And I think of the word legacy. Barry Posner, in fact, when we were together back in September, he said, John, as long as people think about you, you are always going to be alive. And I was like, wow, because that's the kind of impact we want to have. So when we're not the leader there anymore, what did we leave behind? Like, what kind of imprint or impact did we have? And I think, you know, our credibility, building your credibility, I think knowing your values. I worked with a cohort in a leadership development program just a few weeks ago. And during the process, we give them like 52 values and say, all right, separate these into three stacks: the ones that aren't as important, the ones that are kind of important, and the ones that are most important. Well, the ones that are most important, we force them to get that down to five. And they're like, oh, I can't. Like, well, what's most important to you? If everything's important, nothing's important. Like, you've got to like get this thing down to five. And they were like, I've never been asked to do this. But the data shows, Carrie, I could show you the data, but the data from the leadership challenge indicates that even knowing your personal values leads to greater commitment from yourself to the organization than commitment to the organization's values. But a lot of times leaders don't know their personal value. They don't know what's most important to them. They know the five values that are on the three values that are on the wall, but personally, people follow people who know what they believe. People want to know who you are, what you believe, and where we're going. And I think trying to answer those questions early on in your career, who am I? What do I believe? And then where am I going to take this team? And then being able to paint this picture about where we are going to go into the future is going to set yourself up to where you can really be an effective leader. But so often, in my experience, leaders they don't know who they are and what they believe. And so I would encourage new leaders or people that are grappling to really make an impact. You've got to know who you are and what you believe. Kuzis and Posner, I know I've quoted them a lot, but I'm just such a firm believer in what they have written. And I want to give them credit. But they say, you know, people aren't going to believe the messenger and the without believing. They're not going to believe the message without believing the messenger. And there has to be alignment. There has to be some alignment between what you say and what people see. And so that's why it's so critical to know what we believe and what our core values are. So that's kind of what I would say is know who
Yeah.
you are, know what you believe, and know where you're going to take people.
That's very well said. And not a simple task, but one that's, I would say, we're coming up on the holiday season. When you've got some downtime, it would be a great time to reflect, maybe even write a couple things that OpenAI can then help you walk through. There's a ton of tools out there now to make that easier, but that is work well worth it. Well, let's talk about something so fun. And I tell you, I mentioned earlier, I've known you for years and have gotten to see you speak a lot of times, probably more than most, just because we were colleagues for a while. And I loved listening to you speak, even though we would prep together. You're such a wealth of knowledge, Sean, and always good with the quotes and the research and the word pictures and the alliterations, all of that. And so I was so excited when I found out that you were writing a book. I was so excited for you because I knew it was going to be a good one. You're just a great orator. And so I knew that was going to translate well. And I can't say there's been a ton of books that I've read from cover to cover in one day. And this book right here, I did. I read it from cover to cover in one day. And if you're not watching us on YouTube or on video on Spotify, I'm holding up a copy of John's book, Nobility, which is a super good looking book. It's got a good feeling cover. It's just excellent. This is an excellent read and a quick read, but also inspirational. It touches the heart. And so I would love to hear, how did you come up with the concept for Nobility?
Wow. Probably, Carrie, 8, 10 years ago, I had this dream to write a book, and I had written almost 50 pages of 8.5 by 11 just in a Word doc. You actually introduced me to Alex Demchek, and
Yeah.
I did a call with him about writing a book. And when we sat down, just not too long before I sat down with Alex, I'd come across this quote from Ernest Hemingway where he said, "It's never noble to be superior to a fellow human being, but true nobility is being superior to your former self." And that hit me like a ton of bricks because I get so frustrated with our current culture and society of just always trying to put people down to lift yourself up. And I thought, we just need to be a more noble society. And as far as like being better than I was yesterday, and I need to worry about me and not worry about somebody else. And so when I talked already about my high school coach, and he was like, "Johnny, find one thing to get better at today." And it just began to resonate. And so I was like, how do you get better every day? How can I let go of some of the things feelings and resentment that I've had against people? And I was like, well, I'm not like that person, or I've not done that, but I want to get better for me. And so I just took that quote, began to mull it over and put some pen to paper and begin to, and it just came out. And I didn't use probably 5% of what I already had written. I didn't use hardly any of it, but really grateful for the opportunity to share this idea of nobility. And one of the things that I really like to challenge people to do is to ask themselves 3 questions about nobility. And one is like, who am I being? How am I behaving? And who am I becoming? And I'll usually close a lot of my keynotes by asking those 3 questions. Who am I being? That's about my purpose. That's about like who every day, like, why am I here? I want to enhance, elevate, and encourage every human I interact with. Like, am I doing that? Who am I being on a daily basis? How am I behaving? Are my actions aligning with what I'm saying? And is my brand on point? And then thirdly, who am I becoming? Like, what am I leaving behind for my kids and grandkids? Like, who am I? Like, is there going to be are people going to think about me when I'm gone? So I'll always be alive. It's about leaving that legacy. So I challenge people to, you want to make an impact in life. You want to leave an imprint. Like, who are you being? How are you behaving? And who are you becoming in the long run? And so that's kind of it in a nutshell.
You're making me think every year Usually we take either a road trip or we're at home and I sit down with my boys. I've got a son and a husband and we do reflection questions. And I'm not saying it's their favorite part of the holiday season, but it's a requirement from the Roberts household. And so I, that might be my 3 questions this year. I really like that. Usually, I go through and say like, what goals did you have? Did you meet them? What would you change? What are you most proud of? That kind of stuff. But I think that kind of encapsulates it. So those might be the 3 Roberts family questions at the end of the year. Those are great. That would be a great takeaway in and of itself. But is there any other takeaways that you want to share from the book?
That's a good question. I was so proud of the book. Everything didn't make the cut as far as like what was in there. I'm so grateful for my grandparents. All 4 of them made a profound impact on my life. And I'm so grateful that they taught me. I didn't get to write about one of my grandmothers who she was the first to pass away. But when I spoke at her funeral, I was able to say, in 19, she taught this little 6-year-old kid about politics because we were watching TV and President Nixon was resigning. And I was like, what's going on, Grandma? And she, as only she could, explain to a 6-year-old kid. But all it did was like all 4 of them were able in their own way to pour into me this idea. And so I would just like to, give a shout out to all 4 of my grandparents. They've all 4 gone on, but hopefully I can make them proud and that they would look down and smile on this conversation today and know that what they did, they're still alive because I think about them every day and they're making an impact on this world, even though they might not be living here.
Mm. Honoring your grandparents is a very noble cause. That's for sure. So I've loved this. It's been so good to hear from you. And really, it's time for us to grab a beer and totally formally catch up. But
Absolutely.
how can these folks find you? I have no doubt after hearing you talk that I'm going to have some listeners that are like, I got to have that guy in for my keynote for my organization, or, I'd like to get to know that guy a little bit better. So how can folks find you?
Yeah. On LinkedIn, John Thomas 2. Crazy. I was John Thomas 2 in LinkedIn. And then Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter X, I'm coach at coach underscore TTEE at underscore coach T. So those 2 are LinkedIn is a great place to get hold of me and inquire. And I would love to consult with anybody or even come speak to your organization or do a keynote at your conference. Getting more the end of this week. I'm going to be in Kansas City at a fatherhood summit for the Department of Social Services. So love doing those types of things. So would love to partner with you.
Great. Well, I will link John's book in the show notes and ways to get in touch with him. John, anything else you want to add before we close?
No, I'm honored, Carrie. I've thoroughly enjoyed our time together. I know it flew by for me and looking forward to catching up soon and happy
Okay.
for you and proud of you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, folks, we know that spending this time today listening to this podcast was an investment in your own leadership. And we hope that you're here doing that because you know how important investing in your leadership is and what a huge impact that has on those around you, whether you're a formal leader or don't have a leadership title, but know that we are impacting people to our right and to our left every single day. And I know that making an investment in this time and this learning can feel complicated, but the work is so well worth it. So don't waste the chaos, embrace it. Till next time.